The Lifters. New York Times best-selling author Dave Eggers. Chapter 1. Gran did not want to move to Carousel. Chapter 2. But his parents had Litlariki. His father, a mechanic, had not had steady work in many years, for reasons unknown to Gran. His mother had had an accident when Gran was young, and was now in a wheelchair. His parents never explained quite what happened, and Gran didn't feel right asking. After a while, when people asked Gran about his mother's condition, he just said, "She was born that way." It was the easiest way out of the conversation. But he remembered when she walked. He remembered that she had once worked as an artist in museums, making the animals in dioramas look realistic. He had a foggy memory of standing, as a toddler, in an African savanna with her as she touched up the whiskers of a cheetah. That was before the wheelchair. Then Gran's sister Maisie was born, and his mother hadn't returned to work. Gran's father had built a studio for her, enclosing their deck and filling it with easels and paint and work tables, everything the right height. But Gran couldn't remember her ever using it. "My art is them now," Gran heard her say to his father one day. At the time, Gran didn't know what that meant. Something of her talents had rubbed off on Gran. When he was 4, his mother began giving him a certain kind of clay, available in hundreds of colors, that hardened when baked in the oven. With this clay, and with his mother's gentle guidance, he formed penguins and dolphins and narwhal sea creatures who shared the Atlantic with him. There was a distinct satisfaction in taking a block of blue clay and warming it, rolling it into a ball, then pinching it here to make a fin, squeezing there to make a tail, and suddenly, from a blue ball there was something like a whale. Gran made animals from clay when he was happy, when he was sad, and especially when his parents fought. He was never sure what would happen when his parents argued, how loud it would get or how long it would go on, but he always knew that in 20 minutes, as their voices faded from his mind, he could make a ball of colored clay look like an orca, a manatee, a hammerhead shark. As he worked, Maisie usually watched. "Doesn't look like anything," she would say as he first rolled the clay. He would pinch and pull, and she would say, "Looks like a snake." "Snakes are boring." Then he would twist and poke, and something different and specific would emerge, and always Maisie acted like it was a miracle. "How'd you do that?" she would ask, her voice awed. Gran liked nothing better in the world than to hear his sister's voice awed. It gave him immeasurable strength for reasons he could not know. Chapter 3. Read over the years, money had grown tighter, and there was nothing left over for clay. Now work had been offered to Gran's father in Carousel, a town where Gran's great-great-grandparents had once lived. Much less expensive there, Gran's father had said. Less stressful. Less traffic, Gran's mother had said. What about the ocean? Maisie had said. She was 5 years old now, and had been amassing a tremendous sand dollar collection. "There's no ocean there," Gran's mother had said to Maisie and Gran. "But there are hills, and a river winds through the town, and there are trees, and raccoons, and foxes, and more deer than you've ever seen or could count." Chapter 4. To one day Gran, his parents, and his sister Maisie left their coastal Atlantic town to drive to Carousel, a hilly hamlet 1,000 miles from any sea. On moving day, Gran's parents did what they did for any long drive. They woke Gran and Maisie up in the middle of the night, carried them to the car, buckled them in, stuffed pillows under the seat belts, and covered them with blankets. "I am a burrito," Maisie said. "You are not a burrito," her father said. "Go back to Sulsep." When Gran and Maisie next woke up, they were at a gas station. Halfway there, their mother said. It was warm in the car, so they fell asleep again. The next time they woke, they were parked in front of a narrow 2-story house located midway up a slope crowded with other wooden homes. "This is Carousel," their mother said. "This is our new house," their father said. "Not that it's new. My great-grandfather built it." "When?" Gran asked. His father opened the car's passenger side door and sat, putting on his boots. He liked to drive barefoot. He paused for a long moment, his right boot in his left hand. Shoot. Now I can't remember. I know it's on a plaque inside. Or used to be. I want to say it was 1924. Or 1942. I'm almost sure it was an even number. Why's the house crooked? Maisie said. Maisie, shush, her mother said. They got out of the car and stood for a moment on the sidewalk, which zigzagged up and down the hill, in front of the other homes that dotted the street. Gran agreed with Maisie, the house looked crooked. The first floor seemed to be leaning to the right, and the second floor leaned to the left, and all of it seemed to be leaning ever so slightly downhill. But Gran knew saying any of this might hurt his father's feelings, so he stayed quiet. Gran's father was standing with his hands on his hips, his head tilted and eyes squinting at the house, as if trying to figure it out. Something's off, his father said. It's fine, Ben, his mother said. It's just fine. Chapter 5. This new house and this new town were in every way different from where Gran's family had come. Their previous home was an apartment near the sea, and there, the landscape of their town had been flat, and most of it paved. The only time Gran had seen any kind of distance was when he went to the beach, where he could see the wide sweep of the coast. But Carousel was hilly and wild. The roads were curvy and full of potholes. There were barns next to gravel mountains next to auto parts stores next to wide-open pastures. In their apartment by the sea, the doors had never made a sound, but the front door of this house in Carousel creaked like an old man waking from a 1,000-year slumber. I'll fix that, Gran's father said. When Gran's father showed Gran the bedroom he'd be sharing with Maisie, he couldn't believe what he saw out of his window. He'd never seen views like this. He could see most of the town below, and the river that separated the town from a steep expanse of wooded hills beyond. He could see the railroad that ran along the Silver Zigzag River, and could see the steeples of the two churches, and could see people coming and going into the grocery 20 blocks away. Next to the grocery store was some kind of flea market, and just up from that was a red brick building that Gran assumed was City Hall. Come up here, his father yelled. Gran looked into the hallway, where he saw a ladder leading up. We have an attic, Gran, his father said from above. Now Maisie appeared on the second-floor landing. Gran and Maisie had never seen an attic before. Apartments don't usually have attics. Gran climbed the ladder and Maisie followed, but when she got to the top of the ladder, she didn't want to go farther. She scurried quickly back down. Too dark, she said. It was indeed dark, and smelled like warm wood. Gran made his way to his father, who knelt over an old cardboard box. My great-grandfather's stuff, I'm guessing, he said. Gran peered in. It was a mess of old tools and scraps of metal. There were dark metal fragments of a dozen shapes and tools that neither Gran nor his father had ever seen before. There was a giant C, about the size of Gran's hand, that he picked up. It was etched with beautiful lines that entwined like the paths of birds. That's a nice one. Brass. I think he was a blacksmith, Gran's father said. But I had no idea he'd kept all this stuff. What are you going to do with it all? Gran asked. No idea, Gran's father said. Chapter 6. Gran arrived well after the school year had began, which is not an easy time to arrive in any new place. But he was optimistic. For one thing, he looked forward to trying out his new name. Gran had never been Gran before. He had been born with the name Granite. His father had insisted on giving him a sturdy first name to compensate for his last name, which was Flower Petal. We needed to balance it out a bit, his father had explained. We couldn't name you Blossom, right? But the name Granite came with its own problems. Gran had to explain it to everyone he met. He usually had to spell it. If his name had been Michael or Derek, there would be no need to pause, explain, to spell or discuss the nature of names, of unusual names, or how you got them. He would not have to talk about earth science, the properties of granite as opposed to marble or sandstone. He just wanted a name that was a name Casely understood, easily spelled. So when his family moved to Carousel, Granite decided to shorten his name to Gran. Gran almost sounded like grand, which was a good thing, and no one would ask how to spell Gran. If someone didn't know how to spell Gran, they wouldn't admit it. Gran was convinced that this easy change would solve all his name-related problems. But he was only partially correct. Chapter 7. Carousel Middle School was only half a mile away, and Gran could get there by walking up the hill, and then over, and the up a ways, and then over, then up a ways one last time. And Maisie's school is on the way, Gran's mother said the first day, which wasn't the first day at all. The rest of Maisie's classmates had been in school for 3 weeks. Gran's school had been in session for 4. Gran and Maisie set out on a warm morning in mid-September and were happy to be able to walk to school. All their lives they'd been driven to school, picked up from school and driven to stores and playdates, but this, simply leaving the house and walking on their own, it made this new situation easier to accept. "Should we run?" Maisie asked when they left the house. They ran up the hill, but it was so steep they were quickly tired. They stopped in front of an extremely narrow house on the corner. It was painted burgundy, and had a turret rising from its roof like a torch. "Who's that man?" Maisie asked. There was a sign on the narrow home's scrubby lawn, and on the sign, a word bubble extended from the mouth of a bald man with a bushy mustache. "No on propositions PNS." "Yes on propositions MNH," he appeared to be yelling. The sign indicated that the man's name was Dr. Walter Wolford. "He looks like a gopher," Maisie said. Gran told her it wasn't polite to compare adults to rodents, but secretly he knew that Maisie was right. This man named Dr. Walter Wolford did look a lot like a gopher, with the same oversized cheeks and protruding front teeth. Gran read the words on the sign to Maisie, but he didn't know how to explain who Dr. Walter Wolford was, or anything about propositions PNS or MNH. "Look," Maisie said. On the other side of the same lawn, there was a different sign. This one featured a kindly-looking woman who reminded Gran of pictures of his own grandmother, his mother's mother. Both his grandmother and this woman had long white hair tied in a ponytail and dark, smiling eyes. This woman's name was Phyllis Feely, and her advice was yes on propositions PNS. No on propositions MNH. Gran wondered what propositions PNS were, what propositions MNH were, and how it could be that the people on the signs could be disagreeing with each other so vehemently on the same lawn. While he was wondering all this, a screeching voice came from the Burgundy home. "Loiterer," the voice yelled. "Off the grass!" It was the voice of a middle-aged woman, and Gran located its source, a silhouette standing in the window of the narrow house. "Is she yelling at us?" Maisie asked. Gran was sure she couldn't be. He was 12 years old and had never been yelled at by a stranger. "Leave them alone, Teresa," said another voice, this one soothing, like warm water bubbling from a kettle. Gran saw a different woman's silhouette in the window of the other side of the same house. "They're only kids." "Quiet, Therese," the first woman screeched. Now Gran had the feeling they were talking about him and Maisie. He took Maisie's hand and they slowly backed away from the lawn until they were safely on the sidewalk. "Now move along," said the screechy silhouette. "Or I'll send the dog out." "Let them be," said the warm water woman. "And your dog wouldn't scare anyone anyway. He weighs less than a loaf of bread." Gran and Maisie moved briskly along the sidewalk, and as they did, Gran caught a glimpse of 2 separate doghouses, nearly identical, on either side of the narrow burgundy house. In each doghouse there was the tiny face of a tiny dog. They seemed to be twins and both seemed bored beyond tears by the bickering of the women in the windows. The back and forth continued between the 2 voices until Gran and Maisie were long gone. Chapter 8. As soon as they saw the playground of Carousel Elementary, Maisie ran to it as if she'd been going there all year. "Wait," Gran said, but she had already disappeared into a winding, zebra-striped tube. Only her feet were visible. Gran found Maisie's teacher, a young woman with a heart-shaped face and bronze skin. "That's my sister," he told her. "The one going the wrong way on the slide." "I noticed someone new," the teacher said. "It's been years since we had a new family in town." "She must be Maisie." "And you are?" Gran said. He was instantly soaked in sweat. He'd never tried his new name before. "Gran?" the teacher repeated. "Yes," he said. He waited with dread to see how the heart-faced teacher would react, but she simply said got it before turning her attention back to the playground. Gran walked on, feeling reasonably good about how that had gone, and soon saw an unusual man. Across the street and going his way, there was a grown man riding a child's dirt bike. The man was wearing a tank top, shorts, long black socks and bright orange sneakers. His legs and arms were covered with blue tattoos, and following him sullenly was a pit bull the color of mud. "Sup," he said to Gran. Gran had never seen a grown man on a child's dirt bike before. The men where Gran used to live usually wore suits, or at least dress shirts, and he rarely saw them out and about like this in the middle of the morning. Usually they were at work. Gran was thinking about this man, and about the town, when he saw his new school. Chapter 9. Carousel Middle School was very old and sat atop a ridge that seemed to be falling away beneath it. The building had been made of gray and purple and pink bricks that alternated as if the bricklayers hadn't been able to gather enough of any one color, or couldn't decide on any logical pattern. The whole building leaned heavily toward the downward slope below, giving the impression it would fall at any provocation. Gran entered the building, and nothing happened. That is, this is not a story where the schoolmates of the protagonist are cruel to him. This is a story where the classmates ignore the protagonist altogether. But there didn't seem to be any reason why. At first, when Gran entered the school and made his way around the hallways and through his first few classes, he figured it was because he was small. Gran had never been especially small before. In his previous school, he was average-sized. But now, in Carousel, Gran felt like he'd shrunk. Sometime between when he'd left his old school and arrived at this one, either he'd shrunk 5 inches or everyone else had grown that much. He was now the shortest boy in his class, and probably the skinniest, too. But no one said anything about this. No one called him any names. In class, when they passed papers back to him, they said nothing. When he asked where the bathroom was, they only pointed. When he bumped into a large boy whose baby blue shirt was far too small, it looked more like a bib, that boy said nothing at all. He brushed Gran away as he would a spider web. Even the teachers barely addressed him. They spoke to the classes generally, but when the bell rang to announce school was out, Gran was absolutely sure no one had said his name all day. Chapter 10. How was school? His mother asked. Though she was in a wheelchair, her legs withered and arranged in a tight double S, Gran's mother seemed to be everywhere at once, moving around the first floor of the new house with great speed. "I am definitely the queen of school," Maisie announced, and pretended to jump rope, without a rope. Gran told his mother that his school was fine, and told her, also, that no one had said anything to him all day. "Stop that, Maisie," Gran's mother said, and wheeled herself over to him. She tilted her head sympathetically and, at a loss for words, she simply pulled him onto her lap. Tired and confused, he allowed it. Maisie went back to jumping rope without a rope. When Gran's father came home from work, he looked tired and confused, too. He usually spent 5 minutes at the sink, washing the grease from his hands, but this time went straight for the living room. "Hello, my loves," he said, and sat heavily down on the couch. Maisie climbed onto his lap and he wrapped his arms around her. His hands were still clean. Gran's father turned Maisie around so she faced out, toward Gran and his mother, then he moved Maisie's arms and legs as if she were dancing. He pumped her arms up and down, kicked her legs out like she was a marionette. Watching the two of them, Gran could forget his father was there, controlling her, and for a moment it looked like his 5-year-old sister was an expert dancer, her limbs flying around like a showgirl's. Gran laughed, his mother laughed, and Maisie screamed with joy for a full minute. Then she threw up. Chapter 11. Mare threw up more than the were Erpan. Monish threw up in cars, and on swings, and always when Gran's father tossed her around. But still she loved to be lifted and swung. The throwing up was just part of it, the part where it was time to stop playing and clean up. "I'll get the mop," Gran said. The flower petals always did something unusual when it was time to clean up. They did it together. Gran couldn't place when this started, but as far back as he could remember, they had been cleaning up Maisie's vomit together. The job got done faster that way, and was actually kind of fun. "What do I see here?" Gran's father said, examining the pink and green puddle on the floor. "Looks like spinach. And pears. And gummy bears. Wait, did I just write a poem?" They all laughed, and the job was done in minutes. All that was left was to open the windows and light a candle. Maisie always opened the window. Gran's mother usually lit the candle. Gran's job was to take the garbage, now containing Maisie's latest output, outside. "First vomit in the new house," Gran's father said when Gran returned. "Now it's officially a home," Gran's mother said. Maisie loved the attention. She wasn't embarrassed at all. When the flower petals had lived near the ocean, their apartment had 4 rooms: the living room, the kitchen, which really was just an extension of the living room, the bathroom, and the bedroom, which they all shared. And because the apartment was small, they had all participated in just about everything happening inside. If Gran's mother or father was cooking, they all helped in some way. If someone started cleaning the apartment, everyone joined in. It was hard to avoid, there was nowhere to hide. This new house, with 2 stories and 7 rooms, was cavernous by comparison. But there was still work to do. Gran's father had begun building a ramp for Gran's mother, from the front door to the driveway. The incline was not so bad as it was she could manage, but he wanted it to be easier. There was also the matter of the sinks and the counters. They had to be lowered. And then the cabinets underneath had to be removed, otherwise Gran's mother had nowhere to put her legs. "Let's start with the bathroom," he said. Chapter 12. But there is a sadness that courses through a house where money is uncertain. From the bedroom he shared with his sister, after she was asleep, all that first week and the next, Gran would hear his parents talk quietly about money. His father did not have a job like some jobs where an adult is paid a salary, steadily, dependably. Instead, Gran's father was paid each afternoon for the work he did that day, and was not sure whether or not he would get work the next. From what Gran could gather, his father had been told that Carousel needed a mechanic, but when they arrived after moving 1,000 miles, he was told the local auto shop didn't have much work after all. People were giving up their cars and trucks. Gran remembered seeing the grown man riding a boy's dirt bike. There wasn't enough money in the town to pay for repairs to old vehicles, let alone buy new ones. When Gran's father did not get work, he was at home when Gran got home from school, and the nights were long. His parents' murmuring sometimes turned to hissing, and sometimes fell to yelling. On days when their voices became loud, Gran would look to Maisie, sleeping across from him, and wonder if she could hear what he heard. She never did wake up, but she turned left and right and kicked the covers from her, as if wanting to get free. Then, one morning, Gran's father's car was gone. "He went looking for work," his mother said. "He heard about something a few hundred miles south." "So why are we here?" Maisie asked. "He'll be back this weekend," Gran's mother said. "Get your jackets on." It's supposed to be colder today. Chapter 13. Very morning, Gran and Maisie walked up the hill, past the Burgundy house, where they heard the two women arguing over the issues presented on their lawn signs. Gran and Maisie walked past the twin dogs and their exasperation with the bicker ing, past Dr. Walter Wolford, who was against propositions PANS and for propositions MNH, and past Phyllis Feely, who was for propositions PANS and against propositions MNH. Every day Gran saw the same man riding the dirt bike, followed by the same sullen pit bull whose fur was the color of mud. Gran would drop off Maisie at her elementary school and continue on to his own school, the purple and gray one slanting from the ridge, where no one knew his name. Or rather, they knew but did not care. It was the Monday of his third week when his name was first spoken by a teacher. Until then, they had preferred not to do roll call, so Gran had simply shown up, and because he never raised his hand in class, he was never called on, and his name was never uttered. Until this certain Monday 3 weeks in. It was then that Ms. Rhapsod, his homeroom teacher, made an announcement. "It's come to my attention that some of you have nicknames you'd like to use," she said. "Greta Rose Nagel informed me today that she wants to be called Greta RN, for example. So if there's anyone else who wishes to amend or shorten their name, let me know. I'm not especially patient when it comes to such things. Once I put your nickname or whatever it is down on this attendance form, that will be it, period. I'll send the change to all your other teachers and that will be that. No going back." This was the moment that Gran had been waiting for, but it was very different than what he'd envisioned. He hadn't expected it to be so public and so final. "Anna Applegate?" Ms. Rhapsod said. "No change?" Anna shook her head. "Nathan Delacroix," she said. "You want to be Nat or Nathan D? Something like that?" "No thanks," Nathan said. Gran knew his name was coming up. Flower Petal was dangerously close to Delacroix. And even closer to Esterhaus and Estrada. His shoulders tensed as those students' names were called. "Granite Flower Petal?" "Miss," Rhapsod said. Saying his name, her neck snapped back as if she just smelled something rotten. There were a few snickers and scoffs. "Stop," she said, and the snickering and scoffing ended. She looked at Gran as if seeing him for the first time. "Where'd you come from? Have you been in this class all year?" "Yes, sir." "I mean, ma'am," Gran said. "I mean, most of it." For a moment she seemed almost apologetic. Then she returned to her businesslike manner. "Name change for you, Granite Flower Petal?" Gran's skin burned and his heart rattled. "Back at my old school they called me Gran," he managed. "Okay, Gran it is," Ms. Rhapsod said, and made a note on her attendance sheet. Chapter 14. After the nickname session, no one had said anything to Gran for the rest of the period. In the hallway after class, no one made jokes, no one seemed to be gossiping about him. The bell rang, and when he sat down for his first period class, he seemed again to be invisible. A state of being which, for the time being, he welcomed. It wasn't until midway through the second period, health class, that he found the note in his textbook. It was on a standard piece of notebook paper, folded in half. The handwriting was small and precise and rendered in black. He was no handwriting expert, but he knew that most of the boys in his class had crazed in jagged handwriting, while the girls' writing was loopy and precise. This note was of the second variety. "Dear Granite/Gran, I understand why you'd want to change your name from Granite. But why change it to Gran? Don't you realize Gran sounds like you're a grandmother? A 12-year-old boy shouldn't be called the same thing I call my grandmother. Which is Gran? Question of the day, why didn't you just change your name to Grant? That's a real name. Signed, your classmate." Gran's face tingled. His stomach tied itself into braids. He looked around, suddenly sure that the writer of the note was close by, watching him. But no one was looking at him. He turned back to the note, read it again, and knew it was correct. He hadn't thought of the best solution to the problem. Grant. Of course. Grant would have worked far better than Gran. And now he had to live with Gran in every class, the rest of the year. There would be more snickering. More scoffing. Probably some pointing, staring, laughing, and ridicule. Chapter 15. But none of that happened. No one said anything the rest of that day. The next day, Ms. Rhapsod went back to her usual way of not calling attendance, and the rest of the teachers, who never called attendance in the first place, continued in their usual way. Even the students who had snickered and scoffed the first time they heard the name Granite Flowerpetal seemed to have forgotten about Gran's full name, and his nickname, too. They never scoffed again. They never snickered. In fact, they never noticed him. Never looked at him. No one did. No one spoke to him. Which led Gran to wonder if he was, in fact, real. How can a person be real when 412 other people, his fellow students, could not see him? The days went on, and finally Gran, at the end of his first month in Carousel, walked out of the school and into the bright morning, and was so overcome with the idea that he might not be real that he thought he might be able to walk through walls. How could he be sure he couldn't walk through a wall? He had never tried it. So he walked around the side of the school, to a spot where he thought he was alone and unseen. Then he squared his shoulders and walked 3 quick steady steps toward the building when most people would have stopped, he continued. Chapter 16. The pain of bricks against one's head cannot be overstated. Given that bricks are quite solid, walking into them truly hurts. Anyone who has walked into a structure made of this material bricks will tell you this. Gran was on the ground, holding his head, feeling the slippery blood on his hands, when he heard a voice. You just walked into a building. It was a girl's voice. Gran lifted his head, and through his blood-matted hair he saw that it was a dark-eyed girl from his third-period history class. He remembered her because, next to him, she was the shortest person in the class, just a hair taller than Gran. And every day she wore the same thing, heavy brown boots, usually dirty, jeans, a t-shirt always bearing the face of an older woman with glasses and her hair in a bun and a flannel shirt tied around her waist. Gran had wondered who the old woman on her shirt was. She looked familiar. But he didn't know who the girl wearing the shirt was. Her name was Catalina. Catalina Catalan. Chapter 17. Here, she said, and dabbed at the blood with a cloth. When Gran could see clearly again, he saw that the cloth was a shirt, the flannel shirt she usually wore around her waist. Thanks, Gran said. Sorry about your shirt. It's fine, she said. I turned it inside out first. The blood will be on the inside, where it belongs, right? Gran didn't know what to say. You're Gran, right? She said. You got my note? It took Gran a second to connect this actual person in front of him with the anonymous note he'd received. His stomach collapsed like an accordion. Were you looking for a door? She asked. The note had been unkind, but here she was, talking to him, which seemed a brand of kindness. He decided he preferred this, talking to someone who had judged him cruelly, to not talking to no, I. He knew he couldn't explain it without seeming insane. TM new here, he said, hoping that might explain it all. That explains nothing, she said, and stood. Then she made a huffing sort of sound that seemed to mean she was ready to leave. Get up, Catalina said, and held out her hand. Gran took her hand and she lifted him up with surprising strength. Also surprising was that Catalina's hand didn't feel like any girl's hand that he'd ever known, not that he had much experience touching the hands of girls his age. Catalina's hand was rough and calloused. It felt to Gran like shaking his father's hand. Try not to walk into any more walls, Granny, she said, then turned, tied the shirt around her waist again, and walked off. Chapter 18. It goes without saying that after this incident, Catalina Catalan became very interesting to Gran. He thought about her throughout the rest of the school day. He thought about her during health class, as the teacher, a short, muscle-bound man named Mr. Cage, enumerated the ways students could get and transmit lice. He thought about her during science class, as Ms. Zawicki passed around a furry gray mass, enclosed in a clear plastic box, that she said was the scat of an Indonesian leopard. As fascinating as lice and feces were to Gran, they were crowded out by thoughts of Catalina Catalan. The human mind is a passionate thing. It flings itself toward new things, new people, and it can quickly lose track of everything else. Thus Catalina overtook Gran's mind. He thought about her dark eyes, her dark hair, her strength as she helped him up. But more than any of that he thought how strange and good it was to hear someone, another person his age, speak to him at all. Chapter 19. When school let out, Gran rushed outside. His plan was to install himself on the front steps, hoping to see Catalina on her way out. Beyond that, he had nothing in mind. And so he stood like a stone as 400 students passed around him like water, watching carefully for Catalina Catalan, who he was sure he could not miss. But he did miss her. When almost everyone had left the school and the human river had become a trickle, he turned around and saw Catalina Catalan in the distance. She'd somehow walked out the front door and had passed him without his noticing. And she was moving with incredible speed. Gran, though, could not move with incredible speed. After the first few weeks of school, his workload had become so great that he had been bringing his books to and from school in a roller bag. This was normally fine and good, but was not fine and good today, because the roller bag slowed him down ridiculously, and Catalina was ridiculously quick. She was ridiculously quick in part because she was not pulling a roller bag. This allowed her to almost fly across the street and down the grassy hill beyond. Still, Gran hurried down the steps, his roller bag jerking and tumbling after him. He crossed the street and then stopped on the other side, looking down the hill. He saw her, walking under the dappled light of a birch forest below. Her hair was black and had a high sheen to it, something like obsidian, and because she walked in a certain way, bouncing high on the balls of her feet, he could easily pick her out. Gran hurried down the grassy hill as she disappeared into the denser woods beyond. Gran's roller bag was heavy and unwieldy, twisting and grinding as he ran, and he thought of leaving it somewhere so he could run quicker. But he knew that if he came home without it, or if he lost anything inside it, his parents would be devastated. Or his mother would be. She used this word sometimes when she was disappointed in him. "I'm devastated, Gran," she would say, and he couldn't, so he kept the roller bag, and he wound through the trees, catching no sign of Catalina Catalan, until finally, when the trees opened up to reveal a narrow valley, he saw her. In fact, he saw her too clearly, and now that there were no trees to hide him, he knew if she turned around she would see him, unhidden. What would she think? She would wonder why the kid who walked into walls was now running after her, sweating and pulling a 40-pound roller bag. But she didn't turn around. There was a wind swirling through the valley, and it was unlikely she could hear him. She was walking quickly, determinedly, and she seemed to have no worries about who might be following her. The path she followed wound through the valley and then disappeared around a bend. When she, too, disappeared around this bend, he took off, covering as much ground as he could, as fast as he could. When he came around the bend, there was no sign of Catalina Catalan. The path unspooled for a half-mile at least, unobstructed. If she was still on the path, he would have seen her. In fact, there was open hillside all around. Not a tree in sight. Nothing, not even a gerbil, could hide there. So where had she gone? Chapter 20. The next day, a Friday, Catalina Catalan wasn't at school. Between classes, Gran looked for her everywhere. She wasn't in homeroom and she wasn't in third period. She was nowhere. He knew it was normal enough to be absent one day, but Gran found his thoughts drifting to troubling places. What if something had happened to her in the valley the day before? He pored over a mental picture of a great condor swooping down, taking her away. How else could someone disappear the way she did? During the lunch and recess period, 40 minutes where the students ate their lunches as quickly as possible and fled the building for the school's lawn and playground, Gran took his paper bag with him, intending to spend the time looking for Catalina. He wouldn't miss the loud cafeteria, and he wouldn't miss the game the boys played after eating. It was a strange game. About 20 of them would stand in a circle, and then would take turns running at each other. When the runner got close to the opposite edge of the circle, he would leap at whoever was standing there and try to kick them in the chest. Crucial to the game was that the standing boy couldn't move. He had to take the kick straight on. "All right," the boys would yell after contact was made. Maybe not, Gran had thought when he first saw the game in action. So every lunch and recess period, he'd found different things to do, most of them involving settling into the most out-of-the-way place he could so he could eat unnoticed. Now, with Catalina missing, he had not just the motive to stay away from the playground, but a mission. So he explored parts of the school he'd never ventured to, in the irrational hope of finding her in some secret corner of the campus. Maybe, he thought, she'd changed classes, or changed grades. Maybe she'd been bumped up to junior high? She was smart, so couldn't that be a possibility? Gran brought his lunch with him as he went to the wing of the school where the arts classrooms were. Closed said a sign on the door of the visual arts room. Finn said the sign on the door of the theater arts room. Discontinued for now, read the sign on the music room door. Beneath it, someone had taped one of the Yes on Propositions PAS signs Gran had been seeing on his way to school. At the end of the hall, a set of steps led to the basement. Gran tried every door, finding them all locked, until one doorknob turned. He pushed the door open and walked in tentatively. "Hello," he said. Inside he found what seemed to be a storage space for just about everything the school wasn't using at the moment. Desks were stacked 6 high, flanked by looming towers of wooden chairs. There were empty aquariums, papier-mâché buffaloes, football helmets, and orange traffic cones. There were track hurdles and unicycles and hockey sticks, and behind those, there were old computers and printers and podiums, and behind those, there was a mountain of enormous half-deflated balls Gran remembered from his old school. When inflated, they were huge, bigger than him. Earth balls, his phys ed teacher had called them. Closer to the door, there was something like an office. Whoever managed the space worked here too. There was a cluttered desk, and all around it, at least a dozen rusted and mismatched file cabinets. They stood like a wall of skyscrapers across from an old leather couch strewn with books. On the wall above the couch there were pictures of horses, and horse races, and medals, and ribbons. Whoever decorated the room, Gran thought, had a thing for horses. "Do we have an appointment?" a man's voice boomed from behind Gran. Gran had been so engrossed in the photos that he hadn't heard the entrance of a man who now stood next to him. "Sorry," Gran said, and moved toward the door. "Relax." "I was kidding," the man said. "Who sent you and what do they need?" The man, who seemed to be grandparent age, was exceptionally small for a grown person. He was only a few inches taller than Gran, and didn't seem to be much heavier. He had a faint accent, too, but Gran couldn't place it. "I'm not." "No one sent me," Gran managed to say. He was so ashamed of having snuck into the room uninvited that he wanted only to leave. "Sit down," the man said. "Usually it's one of the gym teachers who sends kids down to get an extra ball or a hula hoop from me. You just wandered in, eh?" "I was looking for someone." "I didn't mean to." "Really?" "Relax. It's okay. You didn't feel like standing in a circle, getting kicked? He laughed inclusively, hoping Gran would join in, but Gran was still too nervous to find anything amusing. No problem. No problem, the man said. He nodded at Gran's lunch. Eat if you want. I eat here, too. See? He walked over to one of the filing cabinets, opened it, and removed an enormous submarine sandwich easily as big as his head. He sat down on a metal chair facing Gran, unwrapped his sandwich and took an enormous bite. Door was unlocked, he asked with his mouth full. Gran nodded, and thought about opening his lunch and eating, too. He was hungry, but still thought it would be easier just to leave. I usually lock the door, the man said. With all the food in his mouth, it sounded like he was talking through a pillow. You have a name? Gran said. The man smiled. Grande? I like that. That's a strong name. It means big in Espanol. You know this? No, it's Gran, T. Gran wasn't sure why he added a T this time, but he did, though it was the quietest of T's at the end, like a tiny tail at the end of a giant dog. Grant, the man said. He repeated the name exactly as Gran had said it. There was something so respectful about the way he did this that Gran couldn't correct him. It's short for granite. Like the rock, Gran said. The man took a long look at Gran, then took another crack at his sandwich and chewed contentedly. In the few minutes since he'd sat down, he managed to devour most of a foot-long ham and cheese. Well, Grant, I am El Duque, he said, his mouth full again. You know any Spanish? It means the Duke. He pointed to a flag, red, blue and white, on the wall behind him that had the words the Duke and El Duque embroidered on it. That was from my riding days. I was a jockey. You ever ride a horse? Not a real one, Gran said. Maybe once on a merry-go-round. He didn't want this man to think he was still riding on merry-go-rounds, so he added, when I was a kid. A thunderous laugh shook the room. It had come from the Duke. Though he was very small, his laugh was enormous. When he was finished, he took another bite of his sandwich and pointed the rest of it at Gran. When you were a kid. Right. So you just came in here to eat, he said, and let out a quick grunt, as if he'd figured it all out and it made perfect sense. There was a knock on the door. Yes, the Duke said. The door cracked open and a head appeared. It looked a lot like the head of Ms. Rhapsod, one of Gran's teachers. No more desks, the Duke said. But... the head said. It sounded like Ms. Rhapsod, too. No desks, the Duke said. No bookshelves. No projection screens. No aquariums. But where? Don't know. Don't care. No more room, the Duke said. The head disappeared. The Duke turned back to Gran, smiled and rolled his eyes, as if he had to apologize to his guest for a noisy neighbor. I usually just sit here and listen to music during lunch, he said. You like Cuban music? Gran wasn't sure if he'd ever heard Cuban music. The Duke walked over to another file cabinet and opened a low drawer, revealing a small turntable. He turned a knob, which set the record spinning. He dropped the needle. The music was tinny and not very loud, but the Duke closed his eyes as if he were hearing the greatest band play his favorite song at full volume. The Duke pointed at Gran. Aw, I think you like it. I see your shoulders moving. Look at Grant go. Gran hadn't realized his shoulders were moving at all, but he didn't argue with the Duke. The music was catchy, and Gran deduced that maybe this is where the Duke had come from, Cuba. He had a faint recollection that they spoke Spanish in Cuba. Listen, listen, the Duke said, pointing to the record player. His eyes closed, and his hand conducted in the air to a certain progression of notes and words he liked. When he opened his eyes, he smiled at Gran. "You're fun, Grant," the Duke said. "You should come again sometime. Keep me company. I'll bring more records I think you'll like. Eat up, though. You only have 10 minutes till the next period." "I'll play another song." The Duke went to the filing cabinet for a new record, and when he dropped the needle to the vinyl, Gran opened his lunch. Chapter 21. When Gran went to bed on Friday, his father was not home. On Saturday morning, he was on the couch. "Drove all night," he said. His hands, dirty again, were raised over his head, as if in surrender. The work he'd found that week, he said, was 500 miles away. Got home at 4 and the Maisie climbed onto his chest and perched herself regally. "Meow," she said, and began to groom herself as a cat would. "You're getting good at that," Gran's father noted. Gran's father barely moved all that day. He napped on the couch in the morning and afternoon, and in between, he sat up so he and Gran's mother could pore over bills and murmur to each other, occasionally reshuffling the bills into a different order. That night, from their bedroom there was more urgent whisper ing. A few loud words escaped. On Sunday afternoon he was gone again. Chapter 22. On Monday, Catalina Catalan was back at school. It had been 4 days since Gran had seen her, and when he spotted her across the school's main hallway, at first he couldn't quite believe it. He stood in the middle of the hall and stared. She was wearing what she usually wore, a t-shirt bearing the face of an older woman with glasses and her hair in a bun, and again a flannel shirt was tied around her waist. Its sleeves dangled around her jeans, worn over dirty brown boots. The bell rang, telling them they had 1 minute left to get to class, but he didn't move until she moved, until she'd walked the opposite way and slipped into her classroom. She hadn't seen him. With a heavy sigh, he turned and made his way to his first class, math, taught by an impossibly tall man named Mr. Plain. The next class they had together was third period, and he hoped that somehow he could conjure the courage to speak to her. He wanted to ask her where she'd gone on Thursday afternoon, how she'd disappeared. But when he entered the classroom, she wasn't there. As the students filed in and the bell marking the beginning of class rang, she was nowhere to be found. His seat was at the front, and as he thought about the implications of this, that she was again absent, he heard the back door of the classroom open. He turned and there she was. The teacher, Ms. Hamid, was not amused. Ms. Hamid was fond of purples and pinks in her clothing, but her attitude was not so flowery. She was stern and businesslike, and she set her words down carefully, each word clicking into place, as if she were assembling a puzzle made of glass. "Miss Catalan," Ms. Hamid said, "I assume you know that a yawning chasm of time had lapsed between when the bell rang and when you arrived." "Yes, I do." "And I assume you know the procedure that ensues after such a yawning chasm of time?" "Yes." "Good. Then be on your way. Return with a yellow slip." And Catalina picked up her books and was gone. Gran was vaguely aware that if a student was late for class, that student had to go to the office, get a yellow slip acknowledging his or her tardiness, and then return to the class. It all seemed strange, given that during all this, the offender missed another 15 minutes of class time, but it was the way of the school. The strange thing in this case, stranger than the yellow slip procedure, was that Catalina Catalan did not return after 15 minutes. She didn't return at all. Chapter 23. When Gran got home that evening, just in time to help with dinner, he found his mother looking out the window and his sister Maisie pretending to be a cat. "Meow," she said to him. His mother made no sound. This was the first time he could remember her not greeting him when he got home. "Oh," she said, finally. Gran began setting the table. "Just us three tonight," his mother said. She explained that Gran's father was now back in the town they were from, on the Atlantic coast. He had been offered a month-long job there. What kind of work? Gran asked. The same kind he had before. Fixing trucks, she said, but she seemed uncertain. Gran had the feeling that his mother did not have all the information she'd like to have. Something happened to the mailbox, too, his mother said. Gran had noticed it on the way in. It was crooked now, as if someone had pulled it to one side. So why are we here? Maisie asked, then meowed. We came here for work, but now he's back there for work? Nothing's for sure, Gran's mother said. So we'll hold tight for the time being. Are you going to be a cat all night? I don't care, but I'd like it to be consistent. Meow, Maisie said. After that, they ate in silence. In the past, when there was bad news in the house, bad news that Gran's mother denied was bad news, she was careful to make lively conversation. Often she'd play a game where she would ask Gran and Maisie which animal they'd rather keep as a pet. Okay, Komodo dragon or capybara? She would ask. Capybara, Maisie would say, though she could never remember what a capybara was. Okay, capybara or star-nosed mole? Their mother would say, star-nosed mole. Maisie would say, though she had no idea what a star-nosed mole was, or quite how to say its name. Okay, star-nosed mole or mud skipper? The game could go on like that for an hour. Gran's mother had studied zoology in college, so she knew thousands of animals off the top of her head and specialized in the strangest members of the animal kingdom. But tonight she was quiet and ate little. Gran watched her mouth moving, though she said nothing. It was as if she was having some long silent dialogue with herself. After dinner she said she was tired, and she wheeled herself into her bedroom and reclined on the bed, staring at a picture on the opposite wall. It was a watercolor of a rowboat on stilts by the shore. Gran, unsure what else to do, sat at the edge of his mother's bed and thought about rubbing her feet. Hadn't she once said she liked that? But he didn't know how to do it, and she might not want that kind of thing at a time like this. So he sat with his hands in his lap. Maisie crawled to their mother's bedside and meowed. Their mother reached down and petted Maisie on the head. Maisie purred, then said, "Fart mouth." "Don't say that," their mother said. "Meow," Maisie said. "That's better." It was still light outside, so Gran had an idea. "Let's do tidal wave." "I'll push." "Meow," Maisie said. Back when they lived near the ocean, after school and before Gran's father would get home from work, they would walk to the beach and along the paved promenade, Gran and Maisie pushing their mother in her chair. They would go faster than usual, so they called it tidal wave. The hills in Carousel were different. These were real. Their mother had to keep her hands on the brakes, and Gran didn't have to push much at all. It was more a matter of braking strategically. Gran jumped onto the back, and his mother gasped, and Maisie squealed, and the three of them barreled down the street like a runaway train. It was slightly dangerous and definitely unwise, but it put them all in a good mood, and Gran loved the feeling that he was driving, that he could control almost 200 pounds of machine and human caterwauling down the road. It was the happiest Gran had seen his mom in weeks. Chapter 24. In the morning, the house was strangely silent. Usually Gran was the last one awake, but on this day, when he got up, he heard nothing. The sun was well above the purple hills on the other side of the valley, and his clock said 7:20, but no one stirred. He went to his parents' room, where he found his mother in bed, Maisie curled into her arms and looking very much like the cat she pretended to be. "I'm not feeling well," Gran's mother said. "Can you get Maisie ready for school? You know what to do." Gran took Maisie into the kitchen, poured her cereal and added milk, and cut an apple and orange they could share. He made her lunch, then got her dressed and brushed her teeth. Gran was putting on Maisie's shoes in the front room when he heard his mother's voice from the bedroom. "Come say goodbye," she said. They went into the bedroom to find her as they'd last seen her. She hadn't moved. She reached out and touched their cheeks with the backs of her long fingers. "Be sweet today," she said. The second they stepped out of the house and closed the door, Maisie said, "I need stuff." "What kind of stuff?" Gran asked. "Poster board, markers, a ruler, and glue," she said. She'd been afraid to tell their mother, for fear of upsetting her. "Okay," Gran said, reaching into his pockets for money. He found $6.21. "If we hurry, we can run to the store before school starts." They ran down the hill and to the grocery store. They bought all Maisie needed, and Gran figured they could take a shortcut back up the hill and over to Carousel Elementary. From the window in their bedroom, he'd seen a stretch of woods extending directly from the shopping area to the school. But when they got to the woods, there was a chain-link fence blocking the path. "Look, it's that lady again," Maisie said. Hung from the fence was a Yes on Proposition's PNS sign, bearing the warm, smiling face of Phyllis Feely. "This way," Gran said, and they worked their way around the closed park, with Gran always keeping his eye on the rising sun to the east. The park was dense with trees and foliage, and as they walked they could hear the scurrying of squirrels and birds in the thicket. Then the park grew less dense, and finally the greenery gave way to a wide expanse, with a lake in the middle of it. "Is that a swimming pool?" Maisie asked. Gran was trying to figure it out. It was an enormous rectangle. Bigger than any swimming pool he'd ever seen, and it was half full of dull-colored water. Around the edges were tangles of steel cable, and strewn about were a few fallen doors and what looked like the remnants of a giant sign. "It says Cateye Sea?" Maisie said, now holding the fence and bouncing on her tiptoes. As far as Gran could remember, this was the first time Maisie had recognized a word on her own. No wonder that word was cat. A gust of wind came down the hill and pushed the water across the pool and toward its northern side, and when the water moved, it revealed strange shapes in the pool. Gran squinted. Could that be the head of a horse? Ew! Maisie squealed. "It's not real," Gran said, though he couldn't be sure. What he was sure of was that there was a horse's face rising up from the surface of the water, as if struggling to breathe. But it wasn't moving. It couldn't be real. Or alive. It was some kind of toy, like the rides in front of grocery stores. "It's just an old toy," Gran said. "Let's go." Chapter 25. "Sounds like you found the old factory, Grant," the Duke said at lunch. They were in his office, and the Duke had somehow found a sandwich bigger than the one Gran had seen him eat before. This one was as big as the Duke's leg. "You do know why this town is called Carousel, don't you?" Gran hadn't ever thought of it. "I know the word carousel, but..." The Duke's eyes were wide and white. "You don't know anything about this place, do you?" Gran shrugged. The Duke paused, and Gran was sure the Duke was about to sigh in a way that would make Gran feel ignorant. But instead, the Duke smiled benevolently. "That's why I laughed when you said the thing about merry-go-rounds. I thought you knew, buddy. This town used to be the foremost maker of carousels in the world. Carousels might have been invented in Europe, but they were improved in America. And they were perfected here. So the town made tons of carousels and sold them? No. Not tons. Making a carousel takes time. At its height, the Catalan Carousel Company built about 10 a year. And that took 200 people, working full-time. But those carousels were beautiful. We sold them all over the world. We even shipped one to Turkey. Wait, look." The Duke ambled over to a file cabinet, opened a drawer, and rifled through it. He pulled out a folder and opened it. He looked down and smiled. His eyes welled. "This was the last one we built," he said, handing the folder to Gran. The folder contained a dozen photos, most of them in black and white, of a carousel in various stages of construction. Men working on the complicated gears and engine that made the carousel turn. Women and men carving and painting the horses, zebras and giraffes that rose and fell as the carousel turned. Finally, there was one picture of 100 or so people surrounding the finished carousel. It stood in front of a stately white structure with columns and a golden dome on top. It looked familiar to Gran. He'd seen this building, he was sure, though it looked different now. "That's City Hall," the Duke said. "Not that you'd recognize it anymore. But back then it was something. And in front of it, we built our most magnificent carousel." "Where'd it go?" "The City Hall one?" "No, we couldn't save that one. But before it." The Duke trailed off. While it was standing, though, people came from Europe to see it. "I once met a man who didn't speak a word of English. But he'd come over on the Queen Elizabeth, then took a train from Boston all the way here. Got off, took a dozen pictures, and got back on the train. I think he was from Finland." Gran looked closely at the picture with all the workers surrounding the newly christened carousel. Right in front, with his hand on the head of a bucking horse, was a very young and very short man who looked a lot like the Duke. "That's me," the Duke roared. "Good eye. You worked there?" Gran asked. "Of course I did. Everyone did. Everyone in town had something to do with the business. There were carpenters, engineers, glassmakers, painters, welders, truck drivers, foremen, shipping clerks, secretaries. And then there were the carvers. I was a carver." "What does that mean?" "What does carver mean?" The Duke's eyes were round and alarmed. "It means I carved things, Grant. I carved the animals. The molding. The poles. Out of wood." The Duke's eyes went from wide to wider. "Of course from wood. What else would it be?" Gran thought of the animals he liked to mold from clay. Was that carving? He wasn't sure. The Duke's eyes closed. "Well, later on, sure, they were made of plastic and aluminum. They started just using molds, and they all looked the same. But that wasn't what the Catalan Carousel Company did. Here, every carousel was one of a kind. Every horse, every animal, every pole, every saddle. Everything, one of a kind. You'll never see two of any Catalan animal anywhere in the world. Look at this," he said, and pointed to the horse he was standing next to in the photograph, the one rearing. "Know what that's called?" The Duke laughed. "Of course it's a horse. But this one is SP style. First of all the animals on the outside of a carousel platform were on what was called the outside row. They were always the fanciest, because they were the most visible. And the right side of any animal was called the romance side, and they were the most decorative for the same reason they were the most visible. So you're seeing the romance side of the outside row. But then on top of all that, this was what was called the lead horse. This one's name was Gussie. The lead horse was the most elaborate, the most carefully made. Gussie here was also a stargazer, which means she's got her nose pointing to the heavens. She was favorite of all the horses I carved. So what happened to Gussie? She was on the City Hall carousel when what? Anyway. After a while, no one wanted carousels anymore. Why? Roller coasters, for one thing. There was a time when carousels were the roller coasters. They were considered pretty wild. People used to get sick on them. A lot of people thought, no, too cray, for me. The Duke laughed loudly about that. Then roller coasters came along, and carousels were seen as too tame. So the orders dropped off, and pretty soon the factory had to let most of its workers go. It was a sad time, Grant. Then one night, as the town slept, we heard a loud commotion down by the factory, and in the morning we found everything had been swallowed up. The earth under the factory just collapsed, and the entire factory fell in. It was such a mess, and during a wet winter. Rain and snow fell overnight 100 much to handle. Nothing was salvageable. That was that. So you started working at the school? Gran asked. Eventually, yes, the Duke said. I was too old to ride horses, and no one wanted me to carve them. I was lucky to get this job. But lots of people weren't so lucky. They'd come from all over the world to make carousels, and suddenly no one in the world wanted them. Chapter 26. On Friday, Catalina was back in school, but Gran had no chance to talk to her. She'd arrived late to class again, spent 15 minutes getting her yellow slip, and returned just before the period ended. When the bell rang, she was gone like a ghost. That afternoon, Gran was committed to finding out where it was she went every day after school. He'd done his homework during lunch so he could leave his roller bag in his locker. He wanted to be unencumbered and agile as he set off after her. Outside, the wind swirled and changed direction and kicked up dirt. Branches fell from trees, birds scattered in all directions. The sky was an unhappy blue. From the foyer, Gran watched Catalina burst out of the school and down the steps, across the street, and into the woods. She was moving quicker than she ever had before. Without his roller bag, though, Gran kept up without difficulty. In fact, because it was so dark that afternoon and there was so much chaos all around, he followed closer, knowing he would not be noticed amid the noise of the wind and leaves and falling branches. His eyes watered in the cold air. His nose wrinkled at the smell of wet earth. As Catalina crossed the first valley, he found himself creeping up behind her, no more than 50 yards away. He was startled by a crash in the thicket nearby. A giant deer leapt out and across the path. Then another. And another. They were all enormous, gray, smelling of animal sweat. His mother had promised he'd see deer here, but he hadn't expected them to be so near, and so capable of crushing him underhoof. But they had no interest in crushing him underhoof. They were gone in a blink. When they were gone, Gran gathered himself and located Catalina again. She was still striding quickly, now a few hundred yards ahead. He could see the sleeves of her flannel shirt billowing behind her. Occasionally, as she cut across a path, he could see her eyes, squinting and fierce as she strode. A crack sounded behind him and he turned to find that a large branch had fallen a few feet away. Had he been even a few steps slower, it would have flattened him. He turned back to the path and saw that Catalina had stopped and was looking directly at him. The sound of the falling branch had drawn her attention. Gran froze and his stomach dropped into his right shoe. But when he looked closer, he saw that she wasn't, in fact, looking at him. She was looking in his direction, but her stare was vague, focused on something beyond him or above him. She turned quickly and continued on. Gran followed. He decided he didn't care if she knew he was following her. It had been a week since she'd spoken to him behind the school, and now he was beyond caring about being polite or timid. He ran toward her. Her back was turned and she was striding purposefully, about to round the bend where she had disappeared before. But this time Gran was running. His eyes watered, his legs ached, but his arms continued to pump, and he saw her grow closer in his sights. Now he saw her obsidian hair, how it shone just as brightly on this dark afternoon as it did on sunny days. And then he saw something in her hand. It was metallic, shining brightly in the sun. It could be a knife, he thought. Or it could be, but then again, it didn't look like either of those things. It was silver, and curved, and what it looked most like was a handle. A handle without a door. He ran closer. He found himself no more than 20 feet away from her, and 20 feet away from the hill behind which she had last disappeared. He saw then that it was indeed a handle. It could be nothing else. It was an ornate silver handle, bent like a sliver of moon. It was the kind of handle that might have opened a medieval castle door. He sped up, seeing that she was about to turn the corner. But he wasn't fast enough. She disappeared behind the hill, and when he rounded the bend, he saw no sign of her. Again she had disappeared. Chapter 27. But this time, he say something. Right there, on the side of the hill, was an opening. A straight 4-foot-high crack, about 2 inches wide. It was the kind of crack you see when a door is open, but only slightly. He crouched down to look inside, and when he put his eye to the crack, he saw what seemed to be a tunnel with Christmas lights strung along one side. The tunnel led to a wide cavern aglow with amber light. And descending down the tunnel and into the cavern was Catalina Catalan. Then a sudden swirl of wind gusted from behind Gran, and the crack in the hillside closed with a thump. He jumped back. His heart pinballed. Something had just happened, something very odd. Humans are good at knowing when something very unusual has happened, and when these things happen, we need a moment to get our minds around these happenings. Gran had just seen a doorway to a hill, and then had seen this doorway close and disappear. There could be no mistake about it. He was standing before a high hill, in front of a vertical wall, and there had been a door there moments before. Okay, Gran thought. Okay. You may be reading this, thinking that what Gran should have done at that moment was to turn and run, because this all was too weird and too dangerous for a 12-year-old boy. But Gran did not have these thoughts. His thoughts, instead, concerned getting the door open again, and helping Catalina Catalan. Because it seemed to him that a classmate who was descending a path inside a hollow hill would probably need his help. So Gran went about trying to get the door open again. It didn't seem difficult, he knew where the opening had been. But now, as he ran his fingers up and down the hillside, he saw nothing. No crack, no evidence of a door. It was as if there had never been any opening at all. The hill was seamless, just a regular mass of dirt and grass. Gran ran his hands all over the side of the hill, getting dirt under his fingernails and mud all over his hands. He stirred up the pathways of ants and worms, but saw nothing like a door. It was impossible. Seconds ago, Catalina had entered this hillside through some door that was no longer there. Gran stood, breathed deeply. He found his eyes welling. He wasn't sure if it was the cold wind or his own frustration. Where was Catalina? Was she trapped inside? No. She hadn't looked trapped. The last he'd seen of her, she was descending a stairway with the same confidence and purpose she demonstrated wherever she went. She knew exactly what she was doing and where she was going. Chapter 28. At dinner that night, Gran was there but not there. The food tasted like paste and the words his mother and sister spoke were muted, seeming 1,000 miles away. The phone rang, and Gran understood that his father was calling and wanted to talk to him and Maisie, but Gran was too distracted. His mother let Maze meow into the phone for a few minutes, but when it was his turn, Gran didn't feel like talking to his father. He brushed his teeth afterward and went to bed. Or maybe he didn't brush his teeth. He couldn't remember. Gran couldn't sleep. The events cycled through his mind. Head followed Catalina across the valley, turned the corner, and she was gone. He found the opening in the hillside and saw her inside the hill, descending some earthen stairway in an amber light. Then the door closed and it was as if it had never been there. But what if the door hadn't been there? What if she hadn't been there? The most logical explanation was that he hadn't seen any of this. That he'd followed her, gotten hit on the head with a branch, and had a bunch of bizarre daydreams. But that was even more ridiculous. He hadn't been hit by any branch. He'd seen what he'd seen. He knew Catalina had been there, and that the door had been real. It was as real as his bed, his house, his sister sleeping next to him. He knew he would not sleep that night. He knew he would not be able to concentrate. Not until he figured this out. So he sat up. He put his feet on the floor. And he made the most interesting decision of his life.